Well, hey there, you're on the internet. Please ignore the bandages, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink, I have in sample form. It's by Noodler's, the infamous X-Feather. And, as you might be able to tell, there's actually more than 3 milliliters in this vial. Or there was originally, because I actually had an original sample from a long while ago that I started testing, and I didn't get the results I expected, so I ordered another vial, assuming that there was something wrong with it. The second vial actually behaved exactly the same way, and bear in mind the first sample was from Goulet from a good 2 years ago, and the other one was from Anderson Pens about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months ago. So yeah, eventually after I finished these tests, I just mushed them together because I really didn't see any performance change. But yeah, so this is the infamous X-Feather. It's an ultra black. It's designed not to feather even on cheap papers. It's known for being extremely thick with a high surface tension, like you might find more in inks intended for like quills and dip nibs, because you know they have it's just a sort of a curved top, and so the ink sort of needs to have a good surface tension to like hold in a bubble underneath that curved top of the nib. So yeah, that can be a problem, and actually it was a problem for me in, well, okay, so in my first test I say that it runs dry. No, it does not run dry. This is actually a fairly wet flowing ink. However, that high surface tension caused a problem with this pen. This is one of the pens I use. This is a JinHao X450. And I tend to love my X450s because they tend to be pretty broad and pretty wet, and I don't know if I'll be able to get this on camera. For some reason it doesn't want to show up, but oh, there it is. Yeah, so there's actually generally a pretty wide spread between these tines. In fact, it's more severe than the camera would lead you to believe. And the density of this ink, you know, the thickness and that ability to hold a broad surface tension caused some serious flow problems with this. It drove me a little crazy. But then I have this Pilot Metropolitan with a Japanese medium nib, and it was absolutely flying out of this pen. So yeah, generally to be more fair on the more economical papers, I used the smaller nib, but since it was so wet coming out of this, I don't know how fair that was. So yeah, but we'll get to that. Yeah, let's look at some comparisons. Yeah. So here's X-Feather. And here's my preferred black. I call it my black. It is my black ink. It's my go-to. I love it. It's another Noodler's ink. It's Heart of Darkness. And you can see they're both extremely dense in color. There's very little shading. In fact, there might be even less on Heart of Darkness. But yeah. Next up is another Noodler's black. This is Noodler's Texas Black Bat from Drum Ghouls in Houston. Again, very similar, very dark, very dense. Next up is Private Reserve's Ultra Black, the fast dry version. This one maybe has, I don't know how to describe it, maybe a little bit gold undertones, whereas this one has maybe a hint of red. And then lastly, Lamy Black. Just because, like, some parts where it starts to get lighter through here, the color really reminded me of the lighter areas, like through here. But yeah, these two in performance are completely different, so. Now, bear with me as I zoom in, because it's never graceful. Sorry, I'm trying to mostly use my right hand today. Okay. Pointy thing. We're using a Q-tip today. Now, this one is the one that I did the way you're supposed to, where you put the line of ink and then pretty much instantly drop it in the water. And as you can tell, there's actually a very distinct line where that initial drop was put. and it's fighting being pushed up. You know, there's some gray through here. But then I thought this pattern, I don't even know how to describe this pattern, was very interesting. And then this one on the left with the D is the one that I let dry, which admittedly is not how you're supposed to do it, but I feel like it's taught me a lot over the years. And here you can see that dot is extremely dense. And bear in mind, I only let this dry for maybe 10-15 minutes. But again, the rest is largely the same, and I don't know if this is going to show up on camera. And it's on both of them, but I'm just going to pick up one. There's like the tiniest little hint of pink up in these areas. It's probably not showing up on camera. It is like the vaguest little hint of pink all up through there. But yeah, so anyways, there you go. There's the chromatography. Sorry. I'm very clumsy today. So here are some chemical tests. This is water, which you can see. Now, I would like to say that I forgot when I did the smear, which is before I even start doing the tests, and then because this is a Noodler's black ink, it takes time for the ink to bond to the paper, sometimes as much as 3 days, but I gave it 1 day, which is longer than I give most inks. So all of these paper tests were given a day to dry. However, I then put it in my completed test file, and forgot that I didn't do the chemical test. So actually, this ink was on this paper for nearly a week before I did these chemical tests. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, water actually got it moving a little bit, and it dyed the page. 1/3 bleach solution actually didn't move it around that much. It just sort of lightened it in some areas and actually changed the color a little bit. Ammonia pen flush did even less than water, which I thought was a little curious. And hydrogen peroxide actually started to like eat away at the paper a little bit. So I sopped it up pretty quickly. But yeah. So yeah, there's that. Let's get on to the paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Now, as you can probably tell, this is an extremely dense black ink. Now, personally, I don't like shading in black inks. I prefer my black inks to be a very solid black. And what you see here, this actually isn't shading, it's that it gets shiny. Where you lay it on heavy enough, it's not quite sheen, because as you can see, it's actually kind of a matte shine in some areas. But yeah, so that's not really shading. But yeah, as you can probably tell, there are just epic dry times. That Japanese medium took 1 minute and 12 seconds to dry on Clairefontaine. And the JinHao X450, when I could get it to run, took 2 minutes and 27 seconds. And I think you can see just like here, you know, just like it's really... I was struggling to get it to come out of the nib, and you can see it in a few spots in the writing. It was really fighting me. It did not want to come out of that pen. But yeah, as I say here, flow problems, ignore the dry flow. It is not. This is generally a very wet flowing ink. It's just I was having problems with getting it out of that X450. But yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. But again, this is a super dense paper. Now, the water test, again, this was given 24 hours to dry, when usually I give it maybe like 20 minutes to half an hour. And I don't know if the camera's going to show this, but it did dye the page a little bit. And it did start to like come apart a little bit, but still extremely clear, extremely dense color, I should say ink, because I'm not sure if black's a color, but anyways, well behaved. If you had to recover that, you absolutely could. Next up is Fabriano Eco Qua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. It's fantastic. It's probably my favorite paper to write on. Again, extremely dense black color. Very, very dense, or I should say dense ink. Dense, yeah. And again, where it's laid on really thick, we get that matte shine. And again, we have absolutely epic dry times. The Japanese medium took 1 minute and 13 seconds, and the fairly broad and wet JinHao, when I could get it to run, took 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Yeah. But, I mean, this is extremely solid black ink. It's intensely black. I actually have a kind of quill like dip ink that I got from a shop in Florence that is so heavily saturated that even the owner said, you know, like this ink it's got so much, you know, pigment or ink component in it that it's a pain in the butt to just clean out of a quill. So this is the closest thing I've ever found to that in a fountain pen ink. It is extremely dense, but yeah. Again, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. Obviously that's not bleed, that's from a highlighter. I don't even know how I got there, but there we are. Now, in this water test, you might be able to see that particularly the dots began to release some of the ink when I added the water, and so they sort of smeared around when I went to wipe it up. Again, down here, some started to release and started to dye the page, but, you know, honestly, look at how clear that is. Look at how dark it is. It didn't feather, didn't freak out. That would be absolutely recoverable. Next up is Rhodia. Oh, camera, calm down. Rhodia, which is an 80 gram per square meter paper. It's got a ceramic coating in the pressing process. And we got slightly more reasonable dry times here on a scale. Yeah, so the Japanese medium took 1 minute and 1 second. The fairly brown wet JinHao took 1 minute and 34 seconds. But this is something I probably should have shown you guys earlier, but if we look at this smear, see how dense that is? Like down here, you can't see the purple lines from the quadrilateral paper. And that's literally me going like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the pen goes here, and I just instantly go like that. Yeah, so it's like this. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is like it. Like, especially that last line has less than a second, and it's so dense. And like here on the Fabriano, it's extremely dense. So this is an incredibly thick ink. So logically, it would take a very long time to dry. However, it took incredibly long. Like, it surprised me. I went into this expecting long dry times. I was not expecting more than a minute on all premium papers in a Japanese medium, but still, there we are. And again, we have the matte shine here, which is rather interesting, but yeah, as I say here, darker than a black hole. But yeah, again, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen, and like as you can see in this 450, I was having such a hard time getting that X450 to write. I had to keep priming the feed. But yeah, so once again, the water test. Now, here's something kind of interesting. You might be able to tell this is actually lighter than above. And again, you know, this test, just like all the others, had about 24 hours to dry. I'd say maybe a little more, maybe like 25. But yeah, it got lighter. It dyed the page. It started to release a little bit, which I thought was a bit curious. But yeah, what's funny is, like, over here in the scrubby, you can barely tell where that water test was. I think that's kind of amusing. But still, yeah. Overall, very clear, very there. Still pretty darn dark. I mean, this looks about as dark as most other standard black inks before a water test. So if you had to recover that, I think you absolutely could. Okay, now next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times. And echo, just because it's such a thin paper. I think this is what, like 52 gram per square meter, something like that. Yeah, it's incredibly thin, and so yeah, of course we don't get bleed or feather or spread on here because like Tomoe River just don't play that. But these dry times are insane. Like, I had my phone out, you know, and I had the stopwatch feature on when I was doing this, and I literally could not believe what I was seeing. So this Japanese medium took 2 minutes and 34 seconds to dry. This fairly broad and wet JinHao took 4 minutes and 4 seconds to dry. Bear in mind, I usually stop counting at 30. The only time I've like really gone to a minute or more was when I was doing the Shimmertastic inks, and at that point I was baffled. I never anticipated I would be waiting more than 4 minutes. But yeah, even here, as you can probably tell, this ink is extremely dark. It's extremely black. It's so dark, it's almost as though it's sucking in the ambient light. It is just intense. And that sort of matte shine we saw across the other papers, it is literally across every square inch on here. It is like anywhere where this ink is, you're going to get that matte shine. But yeah, again, talking about how I had to keep priming the feed, and how here you are most definitely going to see echo just because the ink is so darn dark and this paper is just so darn thin that, like, you're going to be able to, if you're super sensitive, like I am very sensitive to this thing, it bugs me, this would drive me nuts. And again, this is with a bright light coming down here, we can read that. We can read that, so yeah. But anyways, this paper loves to let ink slide away when you add more water. It kind of didn't, which was nice. And it didn't dye the page a lot. It did a little. But yeah, honestly, I think that giving it 24 hours to dry probably made a huge difference, because this paper just does not want to let things sink in. So I think without it, we probably would have gotten very different results. But yeah, as you can see, it didn't get much lighter. It barely got lighter at all. Didn't feather, didn't explode, didn't like suddenly just start coming right off. So yeah, that's good. Now, as I said at the beginning, on the 3 more economical papers, I only used that Japanese medium because I felt it would be more fair, except to write in the name. However, since it was extremely wet flowing, I don't know how actually fair it was. But this is also where we really test the name, because I mean, X feather means doesn't feather. It's designed to not feather on cheap papers. And this is the worst paper I've ever encountered, and that is really, really saying something. Yeah, it's a 20-pound copier paper, and it somehow managed to defeat X feather. Look at well. Look at plenty. Look at got. Look at the. Look at bleed. Yeah, we get feathering. We get feathering, and I actually tested both sides of the page. So this is actually the laid side, not the unlaid side. So yeah, we got some problems. First of all, we got feathering, which is exactly what this ink is not supposed to do. In fact, there have been like pictures of people online like putting it on like paper towels or toilet paper, and it still won't feather. For some reason, it did on here. Yeah. Now, there's no shading. It is still an extremely dark black ink. There is spread. Like, if we look at the line width here on Tomoe River, and we look at it here, there's a definite line increase. The line definitely got broader. Yeah, it took 12 seconds to dry. Bear in mind, it is very common for a lot of inks to dry on here in essentially instantly because it's so absorbent. Most often it's probably like 2 seconds. So 12 really surprised me. But yeah, and look, even here in the scrubby, it still almost gets shiny, which was a little bizarre, but anyways. What I felt was really interesting is this water test. Now you can see how it affected the paper. Like you can see how the paper wrinkled in on itself. But the writing barely changed at all. I mean, there's some feathering, but I feel like that's the same amount of feathering it probably had before the water test. Now that is extremely clear, extremely dark, extremely there. You can barely tell where it was over there. It only just started coming out the back. And I'm not sure that had anything to do with the water, that, you know, because you can see how much it was coming out the back anyway. So that was, the water test was extremely impressive. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper. And yes, this is real Mead. I found some more real Mead. So, yeah. We got slightly better results with the anti-feathering thing, but not perfect. Let's look at the bottom of the N. Got a little feather over there. The E and the R, we got a little feathering, but overall, almost no feathering, which was really, really great to see. Yeah, and we didn't get as much spread. So, like here. So it spread a little bit more than the Tomoe River, but not nearly as much as it did on the 20-pound, which is nice. Yeah, it's still an extremely dark black ink. I mean, this is almost frighteningly dense black ink. And here, it almost gets shiny in spots. But yeah, 14 seconds to dry. I don't think I've ever seen any ink take that long to dry on Mead, because again, it's a very absorbent paper. Yeah, we don't have much bleed, but we do have a couple of spots where it's nearly... I mean, it reaches the other side, but didn't get onto the page below. And there's like some show through, but that's probably mostly just because of how dark and dense this ink is and how thin this paper is. But again, we have a very nice water test. I mean, you can tell because of the paper, but you know, it didn't feather, didn't explode, very clear, very there, very good water test. Now, lastly is Moleskine paper, which I hate because it's awful. And yeah, once again, we disprove X feather, apparently. Yeah, we get feathering, and we get an intense woolliness, and yeah, it's not pretty. Again, took 9 seconds to dry, which is seemingly epic. Yeah, it's we get tons of bleed and show through, and this actually rendered onto the page below, so that is full-on bleed. But honestly, a lot of times when we add water to these tests, when we do the water test, it just freaks out. The combination of this paper, ink, and water can cause very strange results, but here, actually very calm, very tame. You know, like it dyed the page a tiny bit. It maybe lightened just the barest little bit, but it's very clear, very there, very dark, very readable, very recoverable. So yeah, there you go. There's Noodler's X feather. However, that was not really the unanimous result that I got, but honestly, I'm not kidding. That is the worst 20-pound paper I've ever encountered. Not just 20-pound paper, that's probably the worst paper I've encountered in my life, and please just take my word for it, that is really saying something. So the fact that if anything could defeat X feather would be that does not shock me. Was I hoping for something better? Yes. However, as I said at the beginning, this was my second vial. I got a second vial because the first one didn't behave like I thought, which was not feathering. And Moleskine. Moleskine feathered too. So I don't know, maybe I got 2 bad vials years apart from 2 different companies, or you know, from 2 different distributors. But yeah, it's a super dense black ink. It is hard to get out of pens that have a more widely spread tines. It has absolutely shockingly epic dry times, but if you need something that does not feather, well, anyways, yeah, there you go for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.